Target date funds. What are they? Is it a good investment for you? What are the downsides? All this and more in today's video. Let's start with what the heck a target date fund is. It's typically a mutual fund that has an allocation, usually to stocks and bonds, that automatically shifts out of stocks and into more bonds as you get older. It usually has a retirement year attached to it, which helps fund managers determine the asset allocation over time. So just to really drive home the concept, you buy one target date mutual fund, and within it, the fund owns stocks and bonds, and it usually owns stocks and bonds by owning ETFs within the target date fund. And it does this at a specific percentage of each. Say it owns 80% stocks and 20% bonds in the portfolio. And then by the time you reach whatever target retirement year that the fund has attached to it, let's say the year's 2050, you'll likely be in a large bond allocation to keep the risk of loss lower, conserving your investment. All this is done for you over time, assuming you hold the target date fund until 2050 in this example. So are these target date mutual funds worth your hard-earned cash? Well, it depends. The first consideration with a fund like this is that it's a one-size-fits-all investment strategy. It's not taking into account your actual risk tolerance or your goals. All it's using is the desired retirement year to determine your allocation. So you can end up completely over-allocated to stocks or under-allocated to stocks, depending on your risk tolerance level. So it's important to actually look at what percentage of the fund is in stocks versus bonds and decide if that's enough for you and if it'll help you reach your goals. Keep in mind, stocks have higher risk associated with them, but higher reward potential. Bonds have lower risk associated with them, but lower reward potential. So you have to find the right mix for you. Also, for the higher level investors, market environments are constantly changing, and being in a target date fund gives you less flexibility to adjust. Of course, you can always sell the fund and reallocate the money if needed. The next consideration is, what if you don't want to own any bonds at all? What if you'd like to diversify into other assets that a target date fund won't allow? The last consideration here is that a target date fund doesn't take into account your personal need for the funds at retirement, and if you maybe don't need to be in so many bonds by the retirement target date. Let me explain this one. Some people have multiple streams of retirement income. They may have a pension, Social Security, retirement accounts at work, maybe even they have their own personal IRA that they've built up over time. You have to consider the investment strategy for the future as well, because you may not actually need to use the money for retirement in the target date fund in the year that it's actually targeting. You may not need it until later based on your personal financial situation. Or you may be in a situation to never even need to tap into that target date money, and you may leave it as an inheritance to your loved ones. This is where planning and strategizing comes into play. If any of these situations would apply, you might be able to sustain a heavier allocation invested in stocks or maybe even in other asset classes for longer than a target date fund will actually do. But overall, don't let me dissuade you. Target date funds are great vehicles for those who don't want to think too much about investing strategies and just want to have their funds invested and conserved by a certain year, aka the target date. It's definitely a set it and forget it strategy. So here are some tips when you're trying to decide to go this route. First, what are the fees for the fund? Is there a similar target date fund that is maybe less costly? If you are investing in one via retirement plan at work, you may be stuck with whatever options that they give you and whatever fees they charge you. But companies like Vanguard or Fidelity do offer low-cost target date fund options that you could always invest in your personal IRA. Take a look at the variance that we can see in the fees of these target date funds. The yearly fee of holding the fund is also known as the expense ratio. One Vanguard fund has an expense ratio of 14 basis points, which is a little over 0.1%. That's a pretty low expense ratio. And another one by American Funds for a similar target date has an expense ratio of over 1%. Yowza. Fees eat into our returns over time, so it's super important to be aware of them. Another tip, which I touched on earlier, is to check how the asset allocation looks and if you're okay with it considering your risk tolerance. Any target date fund that you're looking at will have this outlined in the fund information website. Here's an example of what one looks like for a popular Vanguard target date fund ETF. Lastly, check out the asset allocation glide path. When will they rebalance the stocks and the bonds to adjust your allocation as you age? What will your final allocation be once you hit your target retirement date? Here's an example of a glide path that American Funds uses for their target date funds. You'll see that depending on if your fund objective is focused more on growth or maybe being more balanced, it affects how the glide path looks. And I found this information in the target date fund prospectus, just FYI. All right, so we covered a lot today about target date funds. To recap, here are a few things to consider when deciding if this kind of investment is for you. 1, does the allocation fit your risk tolerance? Remember, it's a one-size-fits-all allocation. 2, does the fund target date and allocation align with your overall retirement plan and income needs? Remember, some people have situations where they can be invested in a higher percentage of equities longer. Plus, market environments are constantly changing and you have less control here. Here are some tips. 1, check the fees. 2, check the actual asset allocation. And 3, check the glide path of the allocation. When will things change in the portfolio as you go, and are you happy with it? That's it, finance fam. Hey, smash the like button for me, will ya? See you in the next video.